Reddit today. We're doing Reddit/Asktransgender and /Truscum. Let's go. Does a teen trans girl need to keep injecting puberty blockers after she starts on E? Well, Princess Harley, there is a very simple answer to your question. That is, nobody can tell you except for your doctor. That is the only person who has access to your blood work and the ability to read it properly. That is the only person who can actually give you proper medical information about what to do with your body medically. That's it. You do need to advocate for yourself sometimes, because in the case of trans women, a lot of the time you're going to hear there is no evidence for that, but the reason there's no evidence is because there's been no investigation to find that evidence, and in those cases you do need to advocate for your own needs. But in terms of what hormones should you be taking, I don't know. I'm not your doctor. Even a doctor reading your question on Reddit cannot possibly answer that without getting your charts. Aside from the phrasing, this question is asking if there's any good studies that debunk the idea that puberty blockers would make it harder to get SRS later, or that you wouldn't be able to go through puberty normally after getting off the puberty blockers. Yes, several excellent studies. Here is one of them. I recommend subscribing to the International Journal of Transgender Medicine. That's where you're actually going to be able to get some accurate information. The internet is not otherwise going to be your best friend in this regard. Essentially, this study is giving you a window of time. It is saying that within 3 years, there's no real permanent effects. You get off of them, that's fine. You go through puberty normally. It's not going to negatively affect your body, really. But after 3 years, you do start to see some permanent effects. So it's kind of a 3-year window of decide where you want to go with this. Do you just want to go through whatever was assigned to you at birth as puberty, or do you want to go on hormone therapy and go through puberty that way? But no, it's not actually going to make SRS harder. And yes, you can just go through puberty normally if you want to get off of the puberty blockers. Why does every single trans femme I know say at the end of every sentence? I've tried asking them, but the only response I get is, I'm sure that that's a bit of an exaggeration on your part, and that they don't always end every sentence with that. But if you're going to ask ridiculous questions of people, you should expect some ridiculous answers in return. UK petition on transgender youth for gender-affirming care. Fund independent research into gender-affirming care for transgender youth. There has actually been plenty of research, and it has all come to the exact same conclusion that not only is it not harmful to give them the required necessary medical care prescribed to them by doctors, but not giving children the required necessary medical care prescribed to them by doctors is harmful. Think of it as like cancer. If your kid has cancer and you refuse to give them chemotherapy, that is bad for your kid, because that's how medicine works. And plenty of research has been done. The fact that your government, tragically enough, ignores this research and takes random nonsense seriously is the problem. Not that there's a lack of research. There is research everywhere. I included some earlier in this video about puberty blockers. How often do you get problems for being a trans person, and why? How? Well, Floor Dove or Floor Dove, I'm not sure. I actually do not get problems for being a trans person very often. I get problems for being a woman far more often than I get problems for being a trans person. Getting catcalled on the streets sucks. Getting talked over in meetings sucks. Having people dramatically underestimate you sucks. I used to be able to tutor people in math and they would just accept it. Now I can't. They just ignore me, even though I'm still better than them at math. They just don't think I am. When I do get problems for being trans, it's when I have to deal with institutions mostly. Most people are perfectly fine people. You get the occasional person who's not nice, but 99.9% of people, if you give them a chance to, are going to be perfectly fine people. It's institutions who misgender you, who dead name you, who do... These are the people that you really come to hate and that really cause you problems. And the people who work for them, who just kind of look at you like, why are you just not able to accept that I'm not treating you as a human being? It's my job to not treat you as a human being, so I see nothing wrong with it. Why do you see something wrong with not being treated as a human being? Gee, I don't know, Stacy. Why? Why would I? What is your biggest fear as a member of the LGBTQ plus community? Mine is people pretending and not truly accepting me deep down. Well, ultimately, the way that I see it is that there is no functional difference between them pretending and actually accepting me deep down, as long as they just keep pretending in any and all situations. If they can successfully pretend and put on a good act all the time, then I can't tell the difference if they accept me or not. So my biggest fear is for the queer kids. There are laws being passed that prevent them from getting the medical treatment they need, that prevent them from getting the puberty blockers they need, that force schools and institutions to deadname and misgender them, that force the schools to out them to their potentially abusive parents, and that strongly empower parents to act abusively toward their trans children. Think about it this way. If there was a parent refusing to give chemotherapy to their child with cancer, that parent would not be a parent for very much longer. Their kid would get taken away. If they refuse to give life-saving treatment to their kid because it's hormone therapy or because it's puberty blockers, then that's just treated as a parental choice, even though we know it quadruples the suicide rate. So my biggest fear really isn't for myself at all. My biggest fear is for others, and especially for children, for those who would be harmed by society at large because society misunderstands them and refuses to educate itself. It's the same fear that I have in most situations. Frankly, death is relatively inconsequential to me. Allah's going to take me when he takes me. That's it. I don't get a say in that. What I do get a say in is how much suffering I inflict on others, and it hurts me deeply to see others choosing to inflict suffering. When kindness is a choice, it's an available choice, it always is one. Disliking trans people is not an unpopular opinion. You're just an unkind person. Yeah, 100%. Disliking trans people is the exact same thing as just like disliking black people or disliking Asians or disliking people with disabilities. It's literally the exact same thing. You're picking something that is beyond somebody's control, and you are just saying, yeah, I don't like that entire category of people. If you wouldn't go ahead and say, I don't think black people should be allowed to compete in sports because they have an unfair biological advantage, because, that was a common belief in my lifetime and still is in frighteningly high numbers of places. If you wouldn't say that, you shouldn't say that nonsense about trans people, because it's equally true in both cases. It's just not true. I, 20 FTM, don't believe trans women get periods. This whole post is really interesting because this is a person saying, when I was growing up, I was bleeding really heavily, unusually heavily enough that it was medically concerning. I was in so much pain that I couldn't move. I couldn't do sports. I couldn't do any of that because of the extent to which it was painful and debilitating. And because trans women don't go through that extent of an experience, or at least I've never personally seen them go through that extent of an experience, I do not believe that they get periods at all. Kind of an interesting take to have there. So what the original poster is describing for his experience with his periods is that he was one of the, 5 to 10% of people who menstruate who physically cannot get through a day because of the pain, and one of the 5% of people who menstruate who experience iron deficiency anemia as a result of heavy bleeding, and these things don't perfectly overlap, meaning that he was part of an even smaller percentage that experience both those things together, and is saying that because trans women do not fit into this 2% of people who menstruate box that he fit in, he does not believe that trans women have a menstrual cycle at all. But what is a menstrual cycle? Because this is not something that anybody's taught enough about in school. A menstrual cycle is actually a lot more than just the shedding of the uterine lining, and people who either do not have a uterus anymore or who have never had one can also experience menstrual symptoms. There have even been cisgender men who have never undergone any sort of feminizing hormone therapy who have experienced endometriosis. So cis men with no estrogen or progesterone being produced by their body or introduced to it can get endometriosis. Then trans women can as well. Surprise, surprise, right? There is a feedback loop that happens. So the pituitary gland, that thing in the brain, and trans women do have brains, that's what controls the menstrual cycle. It releases hormones, it causes the ovaries to release hormones, there's a whole feedback cycle, yada, yada, yada. But also, the body becomes more sensitive to the presence of estrogen during the menstrual cycle, which means that any amount of estrogen that is currently in the body is going to act on the body more severely depending on the timing determined by the pituitary gland. And we do have a pituitary gland that is still going to be making this determination. So we're still going to have the luteinizing hormone, the follicle-stimulating hormone, the prolactin, the thing that makes your boobs hurt sometimes during your period. We're still going to have the cramping of smooth muscle tissues throughout the body. We just don't have a uterus, so that one's not cramping, but the rest of them are cramping. So the weird poops and discomfort and general abdominal cramping can still definitely be a thing. And yeah, it's very severe for some trans women. Not all. And a lot of us don't recognize these as menstrual symptoms because we were socialized as boys, so nobody told us what menstrual symptoms are, and nobody told a lot of the people who were socialized as girls what menstrual symptoms are because, ew, icky, nobody wants to talk about a period. And then the common pushback there is going to be that because trans women are taking regularized amounts of hormones at regular intervals, that we can't experience a cycle because that requires fluctuations. Two things about that. One, like we already said, the body becomes more sensitive to estrogen during the menstrual cycle, so that same amount of estrogen counts for more. But also, as an endocrinologist explained to me, many, if not most, cisgender women are not experiencing a normal cycle either, because y'all are taking things like birth control that regularize and stabilize your hormone levels, yet at the same time you're still experiencing a menstrual cycle. Go figure, because it's not just about the amount of estrogen and progesterone in the body or the amount being produced by the ovaries. It's also about the brain and just how the body naturally cycles through life. Anyways, that was fun. Reddit's a lot of fun to hang out on, interesting to say the least. My name is Courtney Hugh, and I'm posting every single day on YouTube, a couple times doing queer history and other things, long form, when I have time between my classes. Anyways, like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube things. They love when I say that. I've loved hanging out with all of you, and I love you, my lovelies. Have a great night.